I'm Hillary.
And I'm Rebecca, and we are
Mama Bear Apologetics.
We're just two gals talking about life's big questions from a biblical worldview. Because when it comes to the battle of ideas, we need to be able to say, mess with my kids and I will demolish your arguments.
You mess, I demolish. Got it? Capiche?
Rise up, ladies.
Rise up, Mama Bears.
This might not affect your faith,
but it might affect your children's.
Welcome to another episode of Mama Bear Apologetics. I'm Hillary.
I'm Rebecca.
And today is going to be a very serious topic. Our country has just had so much heartbreak recently, Rebecca, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. Big things.
We're going to be talking specifically about, because I am assuming that basically all the parents out there, if they have kids, at least old enough to hear stuff in their school or hear stuff on the radio, that they're going to be looking at things like the mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas, and they're going to be asking, why did this happen? How did God allow this to happen? Mm-hmm. Have either of your girls asked that, Rebecca?
No, not directly related to the Las Vegas shooting, but my youngest did ask a question this past Sunday, but it's definitely related, but not directly related to the Las Vegas shooting.
Yeah, tangentially related. I think she was grappling with evil, and I think her question went off in a different direction, just about the idea of why God would create basically people who would do such things, but which is all kind of part of what is called the problem of evil. So I don't know, the problem of evil, I'm sure it goes back further than Epicurus, but Epicurus was one of the ones who kind of a lot of people quote the way he says it, but the way he says it is, of course, very ancient sounding. So I'm actually going to use the one that Natasha Crane has in her most recent book. It is not quite out yet, but it's Talking with Your Kids About God, 30 Conversations Every Christian Parent Must Have. So I highly recommend that. That's going to be out within the next couple weeks. But so here's how she phrases it. If God is all good, he would eliminate evil. If God is all powerful, he could eliminate evil. Evil exists. Therefore, 1, God doesn't exist. 2, he exists, but he is not all good. Or 3, he exists, but he is not all powerful. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of taking what Epicurus had originally said and kind of boiling it down a little bit. Mm. So we're just going to talk about what we do when we have our kids coming and asking us this question, Mommy, why did God allow this to happen? Yeah. And we need to talk about it from an emotional standpoint and from an emotional perspective, because whenever you have anything that's basically current events right now, I don't care if we're talking about, this mass shooting or the tsunami, or not tsunamis, the hurricanes or racism or whatever it is, we're going to have to deal with human emotion, and then we're going to have to deal with the ideas behind it. Well, actually with the hurricanes, that's not really ideas, that's just nature. But with evil and the shootings and racism and stuff like that, we have both emotions and we have ideas, and so they need to be both addressed, but they both need to be addressed appropriately.
Right. So we have to identify, is this just like when my daughter was asking the question, it was very intellectual, it was not connected to anything that had happened. Mm-hmm. It was an emotional, but many times when children come to you, we have to address the emotional aspect first. They're grieving, and that's a good thing. We all grieve evil because there's also such thing as the problem of good. If there's a problem of evil, the other side is the problem of good. We have this idea of good and evil, and it's real, it's objective. Mm-hmm. And so and that's why it goes so deep into our being. And so we have to meet them where they are. Otherwise, it's very cold and
it's very sterile and very...
Well, and it doesn't do God a service because God is not like that. He's not cold, and He
didn't stand up from all, heaven and just throw down philosophy. He sent his son wrapped in flesh, to come and live and love.
He wasn't wrapped in philosophy. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes with the farm animals, right? With the stable, right. Yeah, with the chickens and the donkeys.
And so, like, when your daughter came and asked you, and you said it was kind of more of just an intellectual question, that's actually the best case scenario that you can hope for, because when they're asking with just this pure intellectual curiosity, that is, oh God, like that should be every parent's dream right there, because you're not having to wade through all the emotions. Because I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the podcast, but we are endowed with something called the fight or flight instinct. And I know you and I have talked about this a lot.
I think we have talked about it, though. Yeah. We talk about it a lot.
So the fight or flight instinct is basically the part of our brain that perceives us if we're in danger. Now, we don't have to actually be in danger. It just needs to perceive danger. And this doesn't have to be physical danger. It could be emotional danger. And so when that part of the brain lights up, it actually shuts down a different part of the brain, which is called the prefrontal. It's the amygdala. That's what turns on the fight or flight. And then it shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which happens to be where rational thinking takes place. So if you have, I know, it's like, yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. But if you have someone who's highly, highly emotional, basically the part of them that's thinking rationally has kind of, been shut down. And so it's either learning how to activate that part, or just knowing that you're probably not going to have a rational conversation. So when your child comes to you, it's like when someone's not suffering is the best time to address suffering. It's when someone's going through suffering that is the worst time.
Well, what did Job's friends do to him? They did come and initially sit with him, but then they
opened their mouth.
Then they started on the philosophy, and really they ended up doing a disservice to God and Job.
Yeah. So first off, like if your child's coming to you, just kind of assessing where they are, and especially if they're coming about this most recent shooting, saying, "Mommy, why did God allow this?" Affirm their heart, because what that's showing is that you have a child that's experiencing empathy. And that's a
good thing.
That's a very good thing. And so just the idea of telling them how proud you are of them, that they care so much about other people, and just affirming that hurting heart, I think is so utterly important. It's like more than likely there's a very emotional component of them that's asking this question, and you need to kind of acknowledge it and dignify it.
Well, even Jesus, one of my favorite scenes from that we get recorded in the Gospels is when he's standing over Jerusalem. And this, I think, is right before he's about to go in to his final going in and being first hailed as the conquering, a hero sort of thing, and then rejected. But he's looking at them before this, and he's saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you in my arms like a chick." And you see kind of a sadness. He is grieving at the evil.
Yeah.
And so if our Lord grieved at the evil, then we should too. That's a very good natural response. We don't want robots that just don't react to it. So
and so I think it's probably a good sign if your child is asking these questions and they are grieving, because I don't know, I think that shows a real sensitivity that you should be proud of. But I think it's important also to talk to them about how the shooting has made them feel, because they might just need to process. Like, kids don't really have the words sometimes to process through this.
Yeah.
And so just asking them questions, how does that make you feel? Because it might bring up all sorts of other issues like, oh, I don't feel safe. Is this going to happen to us? Or, what about the people who weren't saved? Or you have no idea what kinds of questions are underneath that initial question.
Yeah. I always ask them, what's making you sad, and teach them how to sort of analyze their own emotions, because that is one way that we can control our emotions, is to step back and sort of analyze them and see, okay, where is all this coming from? And when we can do that, then we can, let that rational side kind of start kicking in more, and that's a good thing. So.
Yeah, the rational side kicking in, it makes me think of if you've ever seen first responders who are like, at the scene of a car crash and there's someone on their back who's like kind of freaking out. They start asking them questions that makes the person have to think. And what that's kind of doing is taking them out of this anxiety-ridden, fight or flight, I don't know what to call it, just, kind of freak out. And then it brings them back into, okay, I need to answer these really logical questions. And it kind of brings them back into that rational part.
Prefrontal cortex. This is what C.S. Lewis talks about this in Meditation in Toolshed, one of his essays. You can read it. It's kind of a tough one, but it helps you see. It's called Looking along something versus looking at it. And when you look at it, you're contemplating it, and you can step back and look at your emotions and analyze them. And actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a gift, because it helps us, like you said, to engage that logical thinking and to realize, okay, so this one is not really rational. And this one is, so let's get to the heart of this. And then you can redirect your child and say, well, maybe they're feeling like this might happen to them. And we can talk about, what are the chances this is going to happen, and what would happen if it did, help them be able to think through that. And that way they can learn coping mechanisms for the emotions. I think that a lot of our problems today is that we don't have that. We don't have coping mechanisms. Part of the reason why is because we aren't faced with this sort of thing a lot. People used to be faced with this sort of thing a lot. Not necessarily the kind of Vegas shooter and mass shooting, but death and tragedy, accidents. You think about before the advent of vaccines, how many people just died of diphtheria and the flu. And
people died in their homes right in front of them. It wasn't in some faraway, sterile environment.
Yeah, most people died at home, actually. And they'd have the wake at home. And, people lived in just a lot more pain. They didn't have Motrin and Tylenol. And
if you had a toothache, you might just have to rip that sucker out. You couldn't go to the dentist.
And they didn't have the kind of knowledge we have today about taking care of your teeth and such. So, people just really lived with suffering, so in a way they were forced to have to do this so they could cope better. So we talked about this earlier. I think that if our ancestors were to come back into our time, they would actually kind of feel sorry for us despite all our relative wealth and health and happiness.
Well, I think they would see how, I think about how rampant just depression and anxiety and mental illness is. And I think in a lot of ways we're miserable nowadays. It's like life was hard back then, but I don't know. I think an external hardship is sometimes preferable to an internal hardship, but most people can't see the internal hardship. But I think you're right. I think they would pity us if they came back and really saw what we were going through. In fact, I hear of stuff like Christians over in China that are in the underground church. And, we always talk about, we're sending missionaries there. And they're like, no, we're praying for you, because they see basically how American Christianity is just being strangled with materialism. And
we are a country of rich young rulers. We are like the rich young ruler who turned his back on Jesus. Jesus is offering, you follow me. And we're like, nope, I want my wealth. Or nope, I want my security and happiness. My pastor just shared in our sermon on Sunday that Soren Kierkegaard once wrote that he wondered if his family's wealth was a hindrance to his growth in character.
Interesting.
And not that we want to wish, it's not that we're saying, well, we all need to just, suffering is good, we want to be persecuted. No, it's that the tendency in the human nature is when we're given good gifts and great things, we abuse them.
Yeah. And yet I do know, I just want to say, I saw so many good examples of, and my grandmother was one of them, someone who really knew how to steward her wealth well, that was just always so giving, and she was not controlled by her possessions, and I constantly saw her giving away, and how can I serve people, and I know other people that are like that, so I just want to recognize that it's not necessarily wealth that corrupts, but everybody can be corrupted by anything. It could be wealth. Some people are corrupted by their poverty.
Or their knowledge. Their poverty, or their knowledge,
or their ignorance. Some people are proud of their ignorance.
Yeah,
you can really be proud of anything.
Gosh, we humans, we corrupt everything we touch. Seriously,
we turn everything into an idol.
Yeah.
So anyway, the question, why does God allow mass shootings, something like that, it's just one of the many varieties of the classic problem of evil, which we described from Natasha's book before. But we need to address, when this question is coming at us, it's going to be coming at us from one of two different directions. One of them we can answer, one of them we cannot. And so if we could get them confused, we could give someone a really bad answer. Asking why God allows evil in general is a very different question than asking why God allowed this evil.
Yeah.
So I can plug for Clay Jones's book, it's actually called Why Does God Allow Evil? And I've listened to him give these lectures at Biola, and probably, in my opinion, the best theodicy I've ever heard. So for those who don't know what theodicy is kind of a defense of God. It's a justification of God in the sense of if there's evil, is God justified for that theo God? I think it's, I can't remember what the Latin root is for that, but it's something along the lines of
defense or...
Yeah, something like that. So a theodicy is going to be involving, can a good God allow evil in the world? And the answer is absolutely yes. But when someone says, why did God allow my child to be miscarried, or my mom to die from cancer, or my sister to be in a car wreck, or my friend to be one of the Las Vegas shooting victims. It's like when you ask that question, all the answers in the world basically fall flat.
Yeah.
And what that person needs is love. And there is going to come a point when maybe you can start addressing the idea of, can God allow evil? And they'll be able to kind of digest it from a philosophical perspective. But while they're grieving is not that time.
Yeah. And and the reality is that the pain will always be with them. And that's part of the reason why Jesus came. Mm-hmm. And we have to redirect that to what Paul says about sharing in Christ's sufferings.
Yeah. That
it's just a little taste of sharing in his sufferings, that it's our cross to bear. And that's something that someone who has had a loss or a great injustice done to them has to do. And at some point, or they're just going to be bitter for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just kind of going into this question, I think there's kind of 4 sub-questions where, I don't know, I think a lot of times kids kind of know how to phrase a general question, but they don't know how to really specify what's really going on in their heart and what is it. And so I've decided that there's kind of 4 questions that these are what they're really asking. And so maybe this is through a process of questioning with the kid to find out what is it that is really concerning them. Mm-hmm. And these are the 4 questions. Is God really all loving? Is he good? Mm-hmm. The second one would be, is God really all powerful? Like, could he have stopped this? Mm-hmm. Then is God really all knowing? Maybe God didn't even know about it. Did he know this was going to happen? That can be one of them. And then probably one of the hardest ones, I think, as a parent to deal with is, am I safe?
Yeah.
That's the one
that ties right into my daughter's question today. And
yeah. So we're going to talk about each of these just individually and how you would answer those individual questions once you kind of determine what is it that they're actually asking.
Yeah.
So the first one, is God really all loving? Is God good? Mm-hmm. I think this really goes back to the concept of free will, that love requires free will. There is no such thing as love without free will. You can't force someone to love you. And I think one way that... Oh, you're about to say something?
Oh, no, that's perfectly what you just said. The force. Yeah. If you force someone to love you, it's not really love.
Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. As my husband would say, if you force someone to love you, that's rape, basically. That's essentially. But so in a kid's language, we're trying to talk about the difference between kind of like heart versus obedience. Because they might say, well, free will, why couldn't God just create people that would obey? Mm-hmm. Well, God wasn't looking for robots that would obey. He was looking for people that he could love and who would love him back. And so to illustrate the idea of how you can get obedience without having a heart change, I remember having to do this as a kid, and most kids have to do it now. Have you ever, gotten in a fight with your sibling and were told, say you're sorry? Mm-hmm. And they have to tell each other, I'm sorry.
And you do not feel sorry.
You do not feel sorry one single second. So you have been obedient at that point, but it hasn't changed your heart at all.
Right.
So I think that can be a good way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to show kids, like, this is how you can have obedience without a change of heart. And if God's really interested in the heart, then that requires free will.
And can I say, this ties in also, and this is something that we talked about with our daughter, I like to also think of free will as moral responsibility. And God commissioned us, and this is something that C.S. Lewis talks about, as sub-rulers here on this earth. We have responsibility that we've been given, and that's actually a great compliment and a great thing. And I think we were supposed to rule this world in some way as sub-rulers. And so we were given that responsibility, and so that requires skill, and that requires knowledge, and that requires training. And I think in the tree, with the knowledge of good and evil, we tried to bypass all that and try to get the knowledge without all the work.
Yeah.
And we weren't ready. We weren't ready for it. And so, so free will also involves moral responsibility in the sense that we were made for more, and we are promised more. I mean, it's somewhere, I think maybe it's in Hebrews or somewhere it talks about we will judge angels one day. And, we're going to be rulers with Christ. And so we will be like him in some way, and we'll be with him. So all of this implies that we'll have a lot more responsibility than we have now. And that takes training. That takes time.
Yep. In fact, kept saying, what is that? Our moral responsibility. That's chapter 28 in Natasha's new book. What is our responsibility to other people is like one of the conversations to have, like based on our Christian beliefs. How does that make us responsible to others? And just free will in general means that people can choose to disobey. So I think this goes back to the question that your daughter asked, which the exact question she asked was it, why would God create people if he knew they were going to sin?
Yeah, that was part of her question. Actually, there were two other kind of main questions, but that was a sub question on it. But that was really kind of the heart of her biggest thing, her biggest question. So,
well, hey, that doesn't go away, because John and I were speaking at an university conference this last weekend and had an open Q&A, and for the college students, college senior, that was her question.
Well, I know. Well, I mean, I was like, wow, that is a tough question, sweetie. I mean, I seriously have struggled with that myself, and and I was really thankful. She actually asked it to her Sunday school teacher. And the two questions that she asked, and this the sin and us came later with us, but was why did God create Satan if he knew he was going to sin and mess up and fall? Yeah. And then why did God put the tree in the Garden of Good and Evil if he knew we were going to sin? Why did he do that? And so, and her precious Sunday school teacher said, I can't give you the best answer right now, so let me get back to you next week.
Wow.
And I know. And I was like,
impressed.
So I told Rachel, that's a good thing because I said, that's a tough question you asked. And so just affirmed her that, this is not like we're going to give you some pat answer. No, this is a complicated, rich thing which is wonderful, actually, when you think about it, that it's a question that we can sit and think about and grow in our understanding and knowledge of across our lives. So that shows you how rich and complex our faith is. But so her question that came out of that is, why did God create us if he knew we were going to sin? And basically we answered it in the sense of, why did he create us if he knew we were going to sin, we were going to hurt, and we were going to hurt others? Why was he willing to risk that? And we connected that to, well, we knew that too, and we had you. Why did we have you? And it really hit me that having a child is basically your homage to existence. You're kind of playing your homage to existence and saying that actually existence is good, and the love that I get to experience with my child is greater than all the possible pain and suffering they're going to have in this world. Yep. And because we don't know. We do not. We can think that we have all the money, all the wealth, we have everything in place, and we have no idea. And yet we still do it.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I did, what John and I did with the room full of college students. I said, okay, everybody raise your hand if you really want to get married and have a family one day. And of course, every single one of their hands went up. And so I said, okay,
I love it.
I'm not saying this is a hypothetical. I am saying this is an absolute. Every single one of you may have children that will absolutely reject you and break your heart. Okay, now raise your hand if you still think you might want to have a family. And they all giggled, and everybody raised their hand again. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, so you're saying that, that the possibility of having this child that you can love and that loves you back, even if you're not 100% sure that they're going to choose you, or for a fact, I'm telling you now, they will sin, they will rebel, they will, probably go through some horrible teenage phase, and you're going to live through that. And it's like, knowing
we've all been there.
I know, exactly. We've all been the teenager. Knowing this, you're still going to choose to have children? And they, of course, said yes. And so it made me think about just kind of like a hierarchy of goodness, of things that are good. So like you mentioned one of the ones, and that's one of the ones that Clay Jones emphasizes in his book, Why Does God Allow Evil? the idea of existence itself is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think he even kind of phrased it, some people think, oh, well, we should have nobody exist if someone's going to go to hell. And Clay just kind of said, well, why should I not exist because you choose to rebel? That didn't seem fair. Also, the idea of free will being, I think God really places that as probably one of the highest goods. And we see that because that's like one of the things where he really could exert his dominance over us. But he allowed the angels to have free will. He allowed us to have free will. And he's willing to basically go through the horrors of human history because he values free will so much. And people love their own free will, but it's kind of other people's free will that they would like to be more curtailed. Yeah. Like everybody would have loved the Las Vegas shooter for his free will to be taken away, but they don't want their free will to be taken away.
I want my autonomy. And actually, I want you to bow down to my autonomy anyway.
So one way that I think that kind of giving the concept of within free will, there are lots of highs and there are lots of lows. That's just kind of the nature of free will. And so, with kids, they haven't experienced all that much. And so it's maybe kind of hard for them to picture how high can this high be? How low can this low be? So I think a good question would be to ask them, what is one food that you love, one food that you hate, and one food that you think is boring? And so I'll just give me yours, Rebecca. Something you love, something you hate, and something you think is boring.
My problem is I like all food. I love chocolate.
Okay, we'll say chocolate for the one you love.
And I really hate sushi eel or something. I don't know, something weird. I like sushi, but not all of it.
Okay, so and then what's something that you think is just boring, but you'll eat it?
What is boring? I don't like potato chips. Potato chips are just boring to me. So how's that?
Okay, they're boring. Okay. So, but you'll still eat them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if I'm hungry.
Okay, so we're going to say that the chocolate is life's highs, the sushi is life's lows, and the potato chips is basically no high or low.
Okay.
Would you rather live in a world where you had the option to have chocolate, but you also sometimes had to have sushi? Or would you rather live in a world where all you had to eat was potato chips?
Oh, definitely the first. Chocolate and sushi.
And that's the same thing for me. I think of I'd
endure the bad for the good.
Yeah, if I, the opportunity to have pizza is worth being forced to eat okra, even though I don't think I've ever actually eaten okra. I'm kind of scared. I don't know. It's hairy. I'm scared of it. Yeah. But I would rather that than eating oatmeal every single day for every meal. Yeah. And so this is the idea of, with free will, you have the choice to do good, but people also have the choice to do bad. And you don't just suffer the consequences of your own good and bad. You suffer the consequences of somebody else's good and bad.
Yeah, because our world is so interconnected. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. And so if you truly love that higher good, which would be free will or chocolate or pizza, if you love that higher good, then you have to accept the low lows, I guess, in order to have that. So that's like a really boiled down description of the free will theodicy. That one really could go a lot longer. And again, I recommend Clay Jones's book, Why Does God Allow Evil? He goes into that a lot more. So the second question, when kids say, why did God allow this mass shooting? The first question they could really be asking is, is God good? Is he loving? And we just showed how love entails having free will. The second question they might kind of actually be asking is God really all powerful? Could he have stopped this if he had wanted to? And unfortunately, the answer is absolutely yes, he could, because he is all powerful. So then it's kind of grappling with why did he choose not to, which kind of brings us back to the problem of evil of why didn't he? And so one of the things, and this is also kind of outlined in Clay's book, is the idea that we were not, this world that we're in, it says we are foreigners, we are aliens and strangers to this world.
Yeah. Well, this world is not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
it was originally made to be where it was our home, and now it's on its way out. God's going to recreate it.
So just this idea of, we weren't created for this. We were created for something else. And going back to the free will, God's desire is to live with us for eternity, with us having free will and not using it to sin.
Yeah.
that was his best, that's what he wanted in the beginning, and that's what he wants at the end. And so how do we get to this place where we can have free will for eternity and not use it for evil? I would say
it's kind of inconceivable, actually.
Well, you think of it, but I think as Clay argues in the book, we are being plunged into a lifelong learning lesson that sin is stupid, and that all the things that sin brings out, things like the mass shootings that are going on.
It's an experiential knowledge, too. It's not just an intellectual, which we know. We know. The difference between experiential and intellectual knowledge is vast. Yeah. The impact that it makes on us, right?
Yeah. I was talking with my nephew about this a couple weeks ago, because I was actually trying to address the problem of evil with him. He just turned 11, so I was like, it's time to start trying to get this. So I asked him, Joey, what's something that really, really hurts that you would never do on purpose? And so he thought about it for a second, then he pretended like he was slamming his hand with a hammer. I said, so you're never going to do that on purpose. Why would you never do that on purpose? He's like, because it would hurt really bad. I was like, exactly, it would hurt really bad. So if I left you on, desert island, but you were well provided for, would you ever purposefully, if you had a hammer there, would you ever purposefully hammer yourself with the hammer? And he's like, no, that's stupid. I said, okay, that's a good answer. And so in that sense, all the sin that we're experiencing right now, whether that be even just the smaller sins or the big ones, the big evils, like the big mass shootings, we are learning that sin is stupid. And so one day we are going to be able to live for eternity. And just like, Joey said, he would never smash his hand with a hammer. We are going to fully understand that we don't want to sin because it's painful. It produces pain. And so it's like, think about, pretend, if you were to talk with your child, pretend that we're living in one place right now, and it's a world that has bicycles with training wheels, but we know that one day we're going to be in a world without training wheels. How bad of a parent would they be if they only let their kid go around with training wheels and never learn how to ride a bike? Right. Basically, us experiencing, if God were to come in and just take away every single consequence for every one of our actions. Anytime someone tried to shoot a gun, it would just turn into water balloons. Or, every time someone tried to stab someone, it would just turn into putty and everybody laughed. And, it's like there were no consequences for any actions. That would be like training wheels. And then you step into eternity. Now we have not learned the evils of sin because we've been protected from all the consequences. Yeah. However, when we see stuff like this, like the evils that we see, like the mass shootings, we are learning how horrific evil is, so that one day when we don't need training wheels because we don't want to sin. We're able to ride that bike because we've learned from the consequences of this world.
It kind of reminds me of 2 Corinthians 4, 16, where Paul is talking about, how they're persecuted and such, and suffering a lot. Yeah. He said, so we do not lose heart. Though the outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. So it kind of reminds me of you. This knowledge is coming, this experiential knowledge of God. For this momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to things that are seen, but to things that are unseen. For things that are unseen are transient, like our pain and our suffering, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And C.S. Lewis has an amazing sermon he gave. I recommend everyone read it. It's called The Weight of Glory. It is one of the best, my favorite things that he wrote. Though I love everything, but this is just excellent. Yeah, he talks about in that sermon about how all the pain in this world, God is so powerful. He is so omnipotent. And he can actually turn all the evil that we experience in this world into a glory for us in the future, where it sort of works backwards. And this sort of maybe, what you're saying, we don't know for sure that this is why God is doing it, but this is certainly seems reasonable that this is all working into this knowledge that's going to be adding to this glory that we're going to have with Christ, and this ability to live in eternity and not sin.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, that totally makes sense. I do think, and I've talked with Angelique about this before, of just the idea of, I think that this is almost like training in this world, and some of this in Melissa and Palou, I've talked with her about this as well, because both of them have had significant hardship, and poor Melissa, just with all her health stuff, that I'm saying, you know what, I think that this is, God's way of like training us for ruling, because he does say that, we're going to have different levels of ruling one day, and this is like some people are getting really rough deal. Like you think about the I can't remember if it was, I think it was just the parable where Lazarus, not Lazarus that rose from the dead, but Lazarus the poor man, who sat at the rich man's gate, and he was saying how the rich man received his rewards there on earth, but Lazarus, who received nothing, was having great rewards in heaven for what he suffered there. So I think there is something to that.
And I bet if we were to go and look at their lives, even on earth, we would see, like what Soren Kierkegaard alluded to, a greater character in the man at the gates, the poor man at the gates. So when you've met a child that has had cancer or been through something really bad, they are kind of like an old soul. They have a wisdom about them. Yeah. And not that we ask for suffering, and not that we wish for suffering, but it's going to come anyway. But if we do it right, it can really give to us in a way that we just, is undeniable when you've met someone who suffers well. You know it.
Absolutely.
I think it all, and we have to remember, like what you said, we're meant to live with Christ and to worship, and to rule with him as sub-rulers. And I also think, I think it's in 2 Corinthians, he talks about no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. And we have the first fruits here in Christ's resurrection. But there's more to come. Yeah. So we have to remember that. And so one of the things we have to prepare our children, I guess this kind of comes toward what we're going to talk about at the end, but Christ did say, pick up your cross and follow me. Yeah. Don't not pick up your cushy lazy boy recliner, but your cross, or your iPhone or iPad, whatever, your cross, which was where we get the word excruciating is from of the cross, crucis or something, excruciating. That
cruciatus, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that does go into, so we were saying when your child is asking, why does God allow things like these mass shootings? They could be asking, is God good and loving? They could be asking, is God powerful? They might be asking, is God all knowing? Did he know that this was going to happen? Yeah. And to which again we can say absolutely, but can we find, is there a possible reason why he would allow this to happen? And that's where you have to debate whether or not the child is in an emotional place where they can just really need comfort, versus are they in the question and intellectual kind of objective phase where they're really wanting to say philosophically, is there a reason why God would allow this and he would know about it? Yeah. But I think also underlining that of is God all knowing, does he care a little bit? Is he good? Mm-hmm. Well, and I think we had a big discussion, one of our boards for Biola, about this when we were talking about divine foreknowledge, meaning, what does God know in advance? And does that mean that he doesn't feel anything when something happens because he already knew it was going to happen? And I kind of compared it to watching a movie that you've watched before. We'll say something epic like Lord of the Rings. Even though I've seen Lord of the Rings and I know exactly what's going to happen, I still feel that when Gandalf falls into the pit and when they're waiting for the eagle to come rescue them, I still feel that tension. And so all that empathy and all is still there, even if I know what's going to happen. And so trying to say that God is robotic and, because he knows what's going to happen, therefore he doesn't care, I think is a false dichotomy. Yeah, we're projecting maybe a little bit of what... There are some aspects of God that we won't be able to understand just simply because we're not God. And so we don't want to project things onto him. Yeah. But finally, the most difficult question I think that your child might be asking is, am I safe? Is God good? Am I safe? And well, first of all, you can say he loves us enough that he entered the world and suffered for us. Yeah.
He entered our suffering. He's not an aloof God up there just going, ha, ha, ha. You know, he entered it not only to suffer along with us, but suffer for the penalty for our sins, suffer death. Because death, we all die because of sin.
Yeah.
That's the reality. The wages of sin are death. Every one of us sin. And so it's not like a specific sin. We could say, well, that baby cried at the wrong time, there they died. No, it's not that. It was a sin nature.
Yeah.
So that we all have inherited and we pass on. But no, God entered that. Jesus died for us, yet he was perfect. Mm-hmm. And he did it in such a way to redeem us all one day. He conquered death, and we will conquer death with him. And he suffered for our sins so that we could be with him one day. So that's a pretty amazing God.
Yeah.
That he would do that. So I think we can trust in that goodness.
Yeah.
And we can trust in the goodness that's around us.
Mm-hmm.
If God is so much greater than us, and I know the amount of love that I have for my children and my husband and my friends, if this is just a taste, this is just a sin distortion of it, because I know I'm sinful and fallen, and there's elements of selfishness in there that I want to overcome, how much greater is God's love if he's the source? And so I think, you can take all the goodness in this world and magnify it and say that's even greater because its source is in God. So we can trust that. Are we safe? Well, no, because the wages of sin are death. Mm-hmm. And so we will die. Yeah. And also, one thing that I think is so important to tell our children, when you become a Christian and you are following Christ, you have been marked out by the enemy. Yeah. We are, C.S. Lewis called this enemy occupied territory. We are in the rebel land. We're in a land of rebellion. It's like our troops going into Normandy, right? On the, and we are there, and we've been marked out. And he's going to want to do what he did to Job to us. Yep. And God will allow it to a certain extent within his divine knowledge and what he's doing and how he knows what is the best. And so we have to be prepared for that.
There's a bit of a kind of a balance that we have to have between, when I say, am I safe? Immediately the scene that comes to mind is the scene from The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe when they're talking about Aslan, and they say, I'm trying to remember how they phrased it. They said, well, is he safe? Well, heavens no. Yeah, he's not a tame lion.
I think it's Mrs. Otter or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver.
Oh, Beaver, not otters.
Yeah. And they say, well, of course he's not safe. He's not a tame lion, but he is good.
And
so we don't have a guarantee for tomorrow. None of us do. We could get in a car wreck tomorrow. We could, get diagnosed with cancer tomorrow. We have no idea. And this isn't something we necessarily need to play up with kids because we don't want to give them anxiety. But at the same time, they don't need to fear this because you have this, like I said, this dichotomy between, what you said, will be marked by the enemy, but also greater is he that is within us than he that is in the world.
And do we want a God that we can tame? Knowing our current state, would that be a very omnipotent God or a very good God that we could tame?
I think it's kind of like those women who think they want a man they can control, and then they end up resenting him for the rest of their life because they don't like the fact that they can.
That works into the sort of theodicy too. If God forced himself onto us, we would absolutely resent him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's why he doesn't force himself on us.
Exactly. Yep. So it's kind of a hard one for when they're asking us if they're safe, because we do want our kids to feel like they're safe, like they don't have to be watching for a gunman around every single corner.
Yeah, and that's where you have to say, okay, specifically, are you worried that this is going to happen to you when we are at the state fair or something? And you need to talk about the statistics and the reality, and then you can also say, even if something does happen, we can have confidence in God, and that it will be tough, but we can get through it, and sort of teach them to kind of prepare them in a good way. And I think we have to do this more today than people used to have to do. Children saw death. They had friends dying, like constantly. Now, when I was age, I think I was 7, I had a little friend of mine at church that died in a car accident. And that like rocked my world. And then a few years later, I had another little friend that came down with meningitis and died. She was going to be my roommate at junior camp for church.
Aww.
And Amy Yost. Yeah. Aww. And I still think of her, and I think of my other friend. And so I was exposed to it, and very unusual. And then I had another boy that was in my junior high class that got hit by a car.
Oh, wow.
So it's like,
wow, you had a lot.
Yeah, I guess I do. Now that I think about it, comparison to the art girls, they haven't really had anything. They've had, we've had some older people pass away, but no young people. So it's just more rare these days. So they really aren't as prepared for it. So we need to do it in a healthy way. That's what the fairy tales used to do, right? I mean, you read the fairy tales.
Dark.
They could be dark, but it tells the reality of darkness in this world. And I think that our current world has a real hard time reconciling evil and sin. We want to deny sin, and
we've become too sheltered.
Yeah, but then in some ways we scream and rail about evil like way out of proportion. We're shocked because we're shocked by it. Like it's like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Well, in reality, it's like, well, there's nothing new under the sun. Not that we're jaded. But.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of at the end of our time, so I'm just gonna kind of give a summary real quick of what we talked about. That if your children are coming and talking to you about why does God allow mass shootings, first off, to affirm their heart, the fact that they're experiencing empathy and telling them how proud you are of them for just being like Jesus and caring about people. Talking to them about how the shooting has made them feel, kind of they may need a process and finding out what other questions are underneath the surface. And then understanding that this is a variety of the problem of evil. The general problem of evil, of why does God allow evil, has lots of answers and lots of good answers, but why did God allow this evil? We're never going to know until we're in eternity, and God can answer that question. So we need to be careful about trying to answer one with the other. And then finally, when your child is asking, why did this shooting happen? Why did God allow it? They could be really asking one of four questions. Is God really all loving? To which we answered that love requires free will. Is God really all powerful? To which, yes, he is all powerful and he is able to stop it. But he allows us to experience suffering in this world because he needs us to know this is what sin does. And that's knowledge that we'll need for the next world. Third, they ask, is God really all knowing? Did he know that this was going to happen? And then finally, could something like this happen to me? Am I safe? So those were our kind of summary points. And
can I read the thing that we told my daughter?
Yeah,
real quick.
Yeah,
so she said, why did God make us if he knew we were going to sin? And so we told her, that's a tough one, but in the least, probably for the same reason we had you, even though we knew you were going to be hurt and hurt others in this world, because we wanted to share our love with you. Somehow we knew that love is so much greater than sin and pain, even though it's easy to forget that sometimes. Yes, the same reason we had you, at least, but probably more, I'm certain, because he is love and goodness himself. Think of how much more he can give you of these than we can. He is much wiser than we are, too, being able to see the entire picture, so we can trust him. His love, goodness, and wisdom. Most importantly, his love is so great that he was willing to endure our mess, even suffer for our mess, so that he can end it one day for us. And that's more than we could ever do for you, and yet we still had you. So these things at least, but probably so much more beyond our comprehension.
Good answers. Love it.
It's something we all struggle with, and we will. It's just part of life. And I just want to add that we have a gospel that is good news, but it is clothed in pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And so we can affirm people in the hatred that they have of evil and the sorrow and grief they have with pain and sorrow and suffering, and we can give them hope. Versus when someone rejects God because of pain and suffering, they actually in essence also reject good and evil. And they say that these are just products of natural selection working over time. They're just evolutionary survival products, mechanisms. And really that actually does not affirm the incredible pain and suffering we feel. It makes it less objective to us.
Makes it meaningless and illusory.
It is a useful fiction for survival, and it's not. We know when we are in pain that it is real.
Yeah.
And so God, our gospel affirms the realness of it and says, yes, it is real and it's wrong. and I went through it for you too, as God. And so it answers both of them. I mean, you think of Buddhism, you think of other things. They try to just, teach you to rise above the pain and ignore it. This is like, no, you get right down into it. It's awful and it's not supposed to be this way. And that's what we feel when we suffer. It's not supposed to be this way. So all the people that have loved ones that have been lost in Vegas, yes, their grief is very real and it's wrong. Yeah. And the best thing to do is just go and weep with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just go ahead and pray for maybe the victims' families from this most recent shooting and for tonight. Father God, we thank you that you are not a God who is far away from us in our suffering, Lord. You are a God who has walked through every single kind of suffering, and you say, come join me. I'll do it first so that you're not scared. I'll do it first so you don't think that I'm asking you to do something that I would never be willing to do. You are always willing to join us in our suffering because you say, I walked through it first. You are not far away. You are not uncompassionate. You are not oblivious to what we are going through. You purposely chose to put yourself through everything and more that we are going through. Father God, we know that you can use the most horrific evils to accomplish good purposes, Lord. And I've seen you do it in my life. I've seen you do it in other people's lives. And because I've seen you do it so many times, Lord, I have faith based on good reasons, Lord, that you can do it with this situation too. We pray that you would provide good comforters to the families in Las Vegas, not the kind of comforters that are going to want to explain everything or say why, God was judging Las Vegas or just something stupid, Lord. I just pray that you would shut the mouths of the comforters and open the arms.
Yes.
Closed mouths, open arms, Lord Jesus, and that we would all do our part to I don't know, be your goodness here on this earth, Lord, so that people can see your goodness, even when they are railing against the evil that they see other people commit, Lord, that they can say, that is not God, that is humans. That is what humans do, and that is what sin does. That is not what a holy God does. Yeah. And I pray that we would learn the lessons of this earth so that we can all be with you. And from these lessons learned, Lord, that we can live with you for eternity without sin and without having to endure this suffering. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. This has been a Mama Bear Apologetics recording.
To learn more about Mama Bear Apologetics, please visit us on the web at www.mamabearapologetics.com.
Have you been stumped by your kids already?
Or maybe you have a nagging question of your own that you think would make a good podcast.
Send us an email to askthemamabears@gmail.com and we will do our best.
Rise up, ladies.
Rise up, Mama Bears.
We are all in this together.